eating some breakfast here. Time is just rolling by. It's already getting into October 2025. You have to forgive me. I'm sipping on coffee, protein powder, egg whites, and my 3 packets of oatmeal. Without trailing off my original thought, I'd like to talk about something that's very disconcerting, at the least, that reaches far into the abstract matrix of thought. In fact, what I'm talking about represents all areas that make any compassionate, seemingly well-adjusted, looking at Plutchik's wheel, feeling individual that cares about not only those nearest and dearest and closest to them, but even if they live in a dystopic time or regime pervading everywhere, such as this, clashing ideologies and squabbles and petty conflicts leading to mass murders, even occult suicides, death, the collective consciousness attempting to abort itself in every ill-conceived way. If you were to get into or beyond, when we take Nietzsche's master morality, slave morality into consideration, and really look at the masterpiece that was Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, or Herman Melville's Moby Dick, and I have read both, along with plenty of Nietzsche, though it's been quite a while. I had gotten a hold of pretty much all of his works and referenced many different passages and read long hours of Heidegger and Nietzsche together. David Hume, other people that really, Leibniz, other people that really impacted me throughout history. Now, we don't have any proof as to whether or not these people even lived. I mean, we're looking at the Charlie Kirk, quote unquote, assassination, murder with newfound eyes, where we're realizing that here you have this cloak with this perfect lighting that no one's talking about, drawn over Charlie Kirk, sitting under this this canopy. Oddly, a perfect gradient of light to where you could set up a movie projector and at close distance not be able to tell the difference between what's real and what's not real. I'm not saying he wasn't sitting there in that chair. What I'm saying is every aspect of reality with AI, deepfakes, as even these names become archaic so quickly and morph into something else. There was just a mention that, and I watched this thing. I hate watching Alex Jones, but I just watched this excerpt of a recent interview where they're panning in close up and watching the people that first come up on Charlie Kirk, and none of them are trying to stop bleeding. There's absolutely no blood. The most bizarre situation, you know, I start to wonder, where did John McAfee go? Where did Epstein go? Where are these people going to, right? Are these the types of people, the genetics, the mind, that whatever occulted regime is present says this is the best of our society, and this person passed through the rigors of this ceremony, right? As if they know their true religion, as if they know their true, or at least are being exposed to a higher element of the truth. So we get into the higher element of the truth, right? Nobody likes, like, I watched this terrible movie last night on HBO that got into some very deep areas of the occult here, where I think it was called Bring Her Back. And it seemed to be, I think, an Aussie production. The people seemed to have like Australian accents, but they weren't laid on real thick, right? So it's very, very much watchable. And it got extremely high ratings. And if there's any desensitization going on here, it's to make people ultra sensitive to the mystical, to the abstract, obscure, the unknown, that everybody is looking for and staying in this liminal place of conclusion, where there is no conclusion, but there is no trust, right? So we look at what the Golden Dawn represents, the great work. You know, I've gone off on comfortable trails and tangents with this in the past, but never have I delved in deep, like that movie suggests, when this woman lost her daughter and began to turn to the occult and found herself doing, are we going to say pagan? Are we going to say Wiccan? Are we going to say that this type of magic is something that we are naturally attracted to from a naturalistic perspective? What I'm saying is that the rational mind and the stereotypes that go along with being a male in society, carrying a rationalistic torch, or a secular minded person who's carrying science on their back, is in fact employing, and I've seen Jason 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖘𝖙𝖊𝖗 come under fire recently. Whenever somebody starts to become profitable, right, and other people want to listen to what they have to say, there's an instant collective mind, the horde, turning on such individuals until they realize, oh, I'm not going to get rid of this person. They've been captured into the wave. They're getting thousands of subscribers every single day. The ignorant, the uninformed don't know, right? Where in fact, we don't know if those are even real subscriptions, right? We don't know how many people are really on the planet. We don't know anything about these numbers, and therefore the consensus is the biggest form of practical magic that is assuming what the tangible world, what exists in the tangible world and what it provides. How present are you? How alive are you? As compared to what? A normative or average person's continued state of mind, countenance, agency, if you will, qualia. It's used in scientific circles, philosophical circles, from Penrose to, Kurt Mungel's channel, and all those derivations in between. And we see that the psyops is always sitting right next to it. You have Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel's butt buddy, butt boy, BOI, Jesse Michaels, like a little howdy doody puppet, that seems really high on himself and easy to appease, right? But you see the same type of hubris and temerity being pumped into Tom DeLonge, the people who get with the program but are so conformist and subservient that they want to be left out of the inner circle of what's really going on, right? Feeding them a little scrap and making them feel like they are covert agents or spies is enough for these people, right? They've probably been designated a number, a 007 John D type number, right? And they're proud of that number instead of seeing it as a deterministic, codified, computational directive, as if, oh, you're necessary, but you're only necessary as a patsy, as an ephemeral Illuminati card, as a potential aspect to the codified fork that we may or may not employ in the future. How detrimental are you, right? So we get into very uncomfortable areas. And these areas start with the self. It begins with the self, how we presuppose the self. Not only our earlier experiences in life, which you could get into, Jungian psychology, if you will, where, you have the anima, the animus, Freudian, the id, ego, superego. But then you also have the pantheon. Do you start there, or do you start with the Myers-Briggs, Keirsey temperament, sorter, variants, and personalities, and realize that there's even more obscura shapes and even shadows that exist in between? And morphing this field in flux, which should be in flux, but it seems very solidified, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a pyramidal tier system based on the supply, really the demand of needs, and what happens when we don't supply the demand for natural. Do we use the term natural so that we can break away from the falsity of ontology, right? Do we use epistemology instead of system and appease Nietzsche for his hatred of systems, when he was, in fact, proselytizing a system but couldn't say it? And that system meant exactly, ironically, what ended up happening, is that he is describing the season of the witch, right? He is describing Mother Circe. He is describing why young Sadi, Zarathustra, the Zoroaster, had to do what he did in the time that he did, where he was carrying this. Yes, it's uncomfortable for most people, and they want to point fingers. And even last night on Operation GCD, I was kind of feeding into this, because the great reverence and respect that I have for such a multifarious mind, such as Jason Reza Giorgiani, I should say Reza, but pronunciation withstanding, employs. And when he calls himself a Satanist, he's saying, I'm a Satanist in the sense of the adversary, right? But then a Christian would take that in an entirely different theological dialectical discourse. They would use hard evidence, which there is none, because there is no hard Bible. There is no God-written Bible. Okay, this is the ignorance is that they want to argue rationalistic terms when there is nothing rational that they could argue, because that book, that theological book, in all its abstractions and all its many areas of confluence and influence, all of those are shades and shadows of what's really written, and how the depiction was put together in such a way that blends contradicting terms, not just between the Old Testament and the New Testament, but the archetypes that we look at that are taken from within us, but first attempted to develop first without, and then implement what should have been within. In other words, why, when we know full well about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when we understand Plutchik's wheel, when all of these divisive terminologies have been embedded in society for the long, why is it that we use them against in every sales tactic, just to sell a cell phone, to put somebody into fucking, bankruptcy? I'll cite another movie. It was called The Wave. And you would say, oh, this is just another drug movie, but it's really using the pharmacon, using the drug, and saying, this is how abstract, and it really is the same message, right, that is delivered in Donnie Darko. It is this what the archetype suggests? That if you really want to be a good person, you'll suicide yourself. But you won't do it in a selfish measure of, I feel so sorry for myself, boom. Or weeping yourself off to sleep while you take these sleeping pills. End it. But it's choosing one path of many paths and saying, I choose life by going into the inevitable, and I choose to give other people a better life. But what's really being decided is, I choose the illusion for you. And isn't that what a good parent does? And that gets into the meat of the conversation here, because a good parent keeps the illusion alive for the offspring, right? Wants their offspring to be able to hold on to that illusion a little longer than they did, right? Where there isn't premature violence, right, at a time in development that arrests development, or there isn't some shocking sexual exploit that you witness with your parents that just through a kinetic process just shatters your entire idea of an authority figure, right? Or what incites most people and imbues them with a certain vitality and strength, which could just be really broken down to a constant rebellion, right? They always have to pick a monster, and society will create those monsters for you. And when we get down to it, the artifact that society produces is the monster over and over again. Every day we have a newfound monster, a different monster. We play the monster game. We play the monster mash. We play the terrorist Bush game, right? We play the alien invader Reagan game. We play the trilateral commission fight against the centralized system JFK game, right? In these pivotal speeches that mark the man, right? So we're looking at a blueprint. We're looking at an archetype when we back up of the persona of collective consciousness. What does that look like? We're too damn close. We're just a fraction of a pixel in the entirety of a macro set of twisting and contorting, being and becoming and unbecoming and folding in and folding out of itself, right? But one thing is certain, that the geometry shows a certain flux point, right? Like the flux capacitor in Back to the Future. It's an event, it's a moment held within the undulation of a given field in morphic resonance, right? In contrast to everything outside of it. So when we begin to go into these forms of practical magic, right, when we go into any collective mind worshiping, we are attempting to uniformly go into a much more minority-based frequency or algorithm. And in this, as long as there are people thinking like us, the wave is alive, the algorithm is alive, right? And even more so when you have a group of Tibetan monks, or even more underground processes occurring. You know, that at one time was the Satanic Church, and now people are at least introduced to this concept or this idea. And now there's a there's a majority. You know, I think about the Zizian cult. Even as in its description, it gives patronage and bows down to the primary actors in the Ziz cult, right? It calls them highly intelligent computer programmers, not just conformists that are trying to rebel and break outside of the rebellion, right? But we don't really know what it is. Right? Have they done anything too heinous? Right? But what it does is it spreads out like a virus in a corrupted program that requires a virus, right? If everything was okay, if everyone was happy, if everyone's needs were being met to meet the ends meet, right? MEET, right? Where the ends meet a junction point, we would invariably be producing a positive outcome. The outcomes wouldn't all end up invariably in negative outcomes. And it causes us to look inward ever deeper and to be constantly questioning, what are these archetypes within me where I am given provisions if I go along with it, if I observedly respect the mother and the father, even though I know the truth about them as individuals, I will uphold the role that they play, right? And even more so, the most uncomfortable truth is for most people who really want to see a progress here, right? As opposed to just sort of this suicide mission from birth, prior to birth, really, right? And the red right rituals, placing people within certain bodies, that has been perfected and is only used in certain times because the techne, the computational subset, the technocracy, the technology has long been accurately placing codified individuals inside codified, the existence of codified body forms that can topographically be read as well as if they are motherboards. That is, when you look at it, you look at the height of the pyramids and this morphic resonant field, these Lie lines, this torsion field energy shared in a planetary sense as well. So that when this alignment meets again in a particular way, there will be an activation. There is a suggestion to the ontology that yes, we think on a higher scale. And this pyramid stands with every revolution, with every turn, to say that we mark this time. And many people see it. That points at, again, these main central star systems. You know, Orion, but mainly Sirius. Right? So, and this gets into the doggone, right? Even the doggone tribes, the head binding, 𝕯𝖒𝖕𝖕𝖘, you know, Nephilim named type of venture, right? Studying this. And we get into the fact that we were produced and engineered to play out a certain pathos, rhetoric, and play sway, right? We are ourselves a language model produced by a so-called elite class that are often depicted as gods, that are using us as a resonant, harmonic LLM. That each of our existence and the things that we invariably do prove a deterministic track, a deterministic outcome. As if somebody really enjoyed a play because it was so complete and holistic. You know, offering entertainment, but a story that could be told over and over again. And that it would be played over and over and over again. So much so that an entire planetary system and universe, cosmos, whether or not you want to reduce that to a solar system, or even if that's really on an illusory scale, you could say the planet. And even if that's going too far, a localized reality of collective consciousness, right? So, the uncomfortable truths, how we regard one another, how dynamic relationships are controlling the impulses, the electromagnetic impulses of thought and transmission of what we are the very essence of our being and our becoming, how we hold values, how much we love our child, how much we love our pet, our duty, our honor, the ability to override us, or perhaps we're immutable, really. How rarefied we are as individuals, or how shared the collective truly is, that we ourselves become the very symbols that are etched in cave depictions throughout times and eras, the same 30 symbols that we see over and over again, 30 some odd symbols, and that we tell a story. We tell a story of the dystopic actions that come about when innocence, again, the attempt to enter into this garden, into this place, cannot be undone. That the field itself has been corrupted. That there is only one way through, or one way out, right? And that is through. And we see with the circumpunct and this swirl that we see over and over again, what it really, truly represents. That we should look out into the expanse of a field somewhere at some time, and not as a pre-written script, a replay of the mind as it should be, but that the outlook, the optimism, and the potential would be of an unwritten ontology or an unwritten nature,